hit the record button knowing that I'm going to do something comparable. A pet peeve of mine is when people try to make themselves sound smart by inventing flaws in a system, finding problems or shortcomings that just aren't there in order to point them out and declare the system to be inferior and incapable of meeting the needs of their own big brain. Specifically, what I'm talking about today is the internet phenomenon of untranslatable words. Now, the concept of a word being translatable or not isn't confined to the internet, and itself not something that I could manage to take issue with. But what you find plenty of online is people talking about that concept. People, English speakers, point at a foreign word, essentially make the soy jack face, and declare that this exotic word carries such nuance and has such a delicate, beautiful meaning that the rudiments of English could never suffice a translation for it. If you were to ask them what the word could possibly mean, they will invariably tell you what it means, which immediately makes the untranslatable claim struggle to hold water because, they've just translated it. But I'm not being stubbornly literal. I understand that untranslatable means something along the lines of difficult to translate or without a one-to-one translation. And sure, fair enough, not all languages have exact corresponding words for all things. And if this was the sort of thing that was pointed out as amusing, as a neat, harmless, cute anecdote or tidbit, then that would be lovely, but it's the attitude. It relies on an original supposition, or rather a deep desire for it to be the case, that English is in some way or another simplistic, crude, artless, unsophisticated. And then other languages are naturally superior. They are capable of nuances that will never pass an Anglophone's lips. What is it then that makes other languages so much more beautiful than English? Well, it's because the person talking about them didn't grow up speaking them. Exoticism is always nice, and what makes it even nicer is that it's sort of a cheat code for sounding refined. For the pseudo or midwit, a tweet, Tumblr post, or listicle about an untranslatable word is the whole package. Not only does it say that you're familiar with a foreign language, but you have a deep familiarity with it. You're really more like a local than a tourist, and furthermore, most importantly, you're saying that the knowledge you've taken in from these exotic kingdoms is too great and powerful to be rendered in English. You lament that you are shackled and bound by the simplistic confines of this language that you have to speak. It lets you for a moment big dick on people who have never had this fake problem, as their small minds never once thought to gaze into the stars of foreign vocabulary. Now look, I'll be honest, I am a language fag myself. I can smell my own. I understand being excited about new things you learn. At my worst, I've even done that annoying thing where you pepper into ordinary everyday conversation the words from the foreign language you're studying, and then pass it off as though it were a perfect accident. Oh God, I can't remember the English word for this. It just comes so naturally to me now. But that is something that a person is meant to age out of, and being a little retarded about something you're studying isn't the same thing as copy-pasting words you've never seen before. As usual, I'm having trouble getting to the point, so I will say that, as is quickly becoming the case, the theme of these rants, I watched a YouTube video that irritated me. Actually, the video itself wasn't so bad, but it did stir and unleash memories, traumas, that I was perfectly fine having forgotten. I watched the video and was struck with the thitherto suppressed weight of 1,000 listicles, aesthetic blog posts, mindless tweets, vapid college girls reciting them, and articles in Mental Floss magazine. When I closed my eyes to it, there, painted on the inside of my eyelids, were those faces of undeserved self-satisfaction, so teeming with infantile pride because they've managed to use Google to find a strange word, and that they get to now pretend it's too powerful for the Queen's English. And that soylent smugness makes me feel something almost like patriotism for my own language. It goes beyond being satisfied with calling them pretentious and providing the English definition that they claim the word eludes. I need to make a proper apologia, a defense of English. The title of the video, mind you, is Foreign Words We Need in English. This is my "you will not replace us" moment. I'm going to go through the video and talk a bit about how frivolous exoticism makes us think that there's more to these words than there really is, how they're not untranslatable, and how we don't need them insofar as some incapacity of English. Again, and before starting in earnest, the video itself is not so bad. I have a problem with the premise, of course, but I wouldn't say that the facts of the video were incorrect or anything like that. Also, it's very well presented by a Dr. Brzozowski, whom I don't have anything at all against. My contention is only with the philosophy and the conclusions that are made. Really, the video is just an opportunity for me to talk about this sort of thing. I don't know when I would get another one.
It's estimated that 75% of English words come from other languages.
See, I wouldn't put it that way. Not to say that it's totally incorrect, but let me explain. English is, of course, a descendant of the languages spoken by the Angles, Saxons, and other Germanic tribes, who at the time of the 1st century AD would have inhabited modern-day Denmark and northern Germany. These people migrated to what would be called England, and consolidated their dialects into what we call Anglo-Saxon. And the biggest influx of non-Germanic words into what would eventually become modern English occurred after the Norman conquest, where, weirdly enough, ethnically Germanic people, for the most part, speaking French, basically ran the country. And so Norman French was so ubiquitous for so long that it naturally shaped the common tongue of the land. To the extent that, for a long time now, these etymologically French words gained during the Norman period are, in my opinion, as natively English as Germanic words. So it's a bit misleading to include Norman French in this category of foreign languages. I mean, to this day, the British monarch, King Charles, traces his lineage to William the Conqueror, the Norman who took the throne. Let me complicate things just a bit more, though. According to one study's figures, which I am assuming is the same one she used, it's right atop the Wikipedia page titled Foreign Language Influences in English, French constitutes 29% of English vocabulary. Note, by the way, that they draw no distinction between the sort of Anglo-French from the Norman and later borrowings from what I'd say is French. And as she has in the video, Germanic is only about a quarter. So where then does the other 55% come from? This study figures Latin equal to French at 29%. This is where I see some real inflation in the numbers. I have no problem with the study itself, Finkenstadt and Wolff, 1973, because they explain things such as that the Latin percentage includes modern scientific and technical Latin. And again, I would take issue with calling that foreign. On one count, I feel that they belong to the world in a way. Latin words do exist organically in Italian, French, Spanish, and whatnot, and they've undergone natural changes from their sort of Ciceronian forms. That, barring from those, I would say is taking foreign words. However, I think there's a degree of sterility in classical non-spoken languages that are used to name things simply beyond the purview of ordinary languages. In a way, mind you, that they weren't even used at the time the language was living. That kind of disqualifies them for being foreign. Maybe. You may think that that's an unfair criticism and you're probably onto something, but I just wanted to contextualize that because the figure alone is very sensational.
It's a very grabby language. If it sees something it likes, it takes it.
That's how languages work. All languages. If you're not the first person to discover something, then you'll probably find out about it from someone else who already has a name for it, and you will take their word for it in a very literal way.
That makes it kind of the England of languages.
Goddamn. I get that it's meant to be a sassy, anti-colonialist jab, but it's just not clever. I mean, for one, yes, it is the England of languages. It's English. And insofar as England's role as a global superpower that made contact with every corner of the known world, then yes, they've picked up some words that way. There's just not a joke there.
That's one reason English has amassed one of the biggest vocabularies on Earth.
Okay, so no, it's not the grabbiness of English that has caused it to amass such a vocabulary. It's more to do with that role as a global superpower. English is the current lingua franca, the default tongue for the world when any two given people don't speak the same language. So when you have so many people speaking English in so many different contexts, talking about so many different things, then yes, certainly you're going to have a larger vocabulary than another language in which global trade and research and discourse isn't done. Why can't you just say that? I mean, I'm not against personification broadly. I love cute shit and silly metaphor, but this just isn't a helpful way to look at it. And don't let it be lost on you that this is a PBS video. I'm sure that she already knows everything I've said about this. But the video is meant for people who don't. In these contexts, things should be explained accurately. We're about to get into the words of relevance, so I'll stop playing the audio now because there's a fun animation for it on the video, and I'd recommend just watching that. Again, nothing against the video, just against the trope, so do check it out. And before getting into the words themselves, she states that while they may be concepts that can be translated into English, the words in their own languages have a certain intuition that translations cannot provide. She then promptly contradicts herself right off the bat. So she talks about the feeling one has when one maybe didn't do so well in an argument, and only after the fact thinks of that excellent retort that would have saved him. You know, the George Costanza jerk-sore comeback. And you can imagine me autistically screeching staircase wit at the monitor as I watched that part. And yeah, that's exactly what she was getting at. She provides l'esprit de l'escalier as well as Treppenwitz for this phenomenon. I understand favoring a foreign word where English has to use a clunky construction to achieve the same meaning, but these are both compounds exactly like in English. I'll concede that staircase wit is a calque, or a literal translation of an idiomatic phrase. But right there, we disqualify Treppenwitz, as it itself is just a calque of the French original. And esprit de l'escalier is not really an idiom in the first place. It's actually sort of a literary reference to Diderot. L'homme sensible que moi tout entier, ce qu'on lui objecte, perd la tête et ne se retrouve qu'au bas de l'escalier. So it is just as much of a reach in English as it is in the German, and in the French original ultimately counts on you having read an 18th century Puff's essay on acting theory. And finally, if staircase wit just offends your delicate sensibilities, then go ahead and try out afterwit, a 20th century coinage, or a word I very much like, retritort. Just a fun word. Next, she describes that phenomenon by which, when you've just been given directions, you forget them as soon as you set a foot. The word for this she provides is the Hawaiian word akihi. Now, grammatically, how is this to be used? She herself takes the easy way out and says that Hawaiians have a word for this. The word is akihi. Now, I will admit, and I hope you don't think any less of me, that I'm not familiar with Hawaiian. But I did look in some Hawaiian dictionaries, and I still couldn't figure out how this word is meant to be used. Akihi seems to mean birds, from what I could gather, as well as being a place name. And I looked at other words that are spelled similarly in case it was just rendered differently, but I still couldn't find it. That's looking in a dictionary. Googling it just retrieves other articles that talk about the fabled untranslatable words. But if you propose I use a word, I need to know how to use it. Like grammatically, is it an abstract noun for the concept? Is it a concrete noun used idiomatically? Is it an adverb, a verb? It's easy and convenient to borrow from, say, French, because the rules are similar to those of our own language, and we have a bit of an ear for it. I know you want to be inclusive, Mr. Worldwide, but it's just silly to use a word you don't even know how to. And again, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance, so if anyone is fluent in Hawaiian, please do prove me wrong. And then as penance, I will find a way to work it into my vocabulary. I'll be annoying to those around me. But until I do get a grammatical explanation, I will refuse to believe that a word has that narrow of a meaning. Like I could see saying that someone went birdie as a way to say that they either forgot something faster than they should have or lost their way. But in all those articles and listicles I've seen that use this word, they claim that it has that very specific meaning of having been given directions and then immediately forgetting them. And I just doubt it. Yes, I get that that is the point of an untranslatable word. But I think we like to fluff up and exoticize other languages, particularly those that are either far removed or have few speakers, Hawaiian being both. And again, I'm open to change on this one, I just don't know. But that barrier to entry itself is a reason why this is not a foreign word we need in English. For the time being, I think I'm fine saying I forgot. Damn, I forgot. I've just been told, and now I've forgotten. I don't think that situation really screams for its own single word. She also gives the Hawaiian word Panapoo. It means scratching your head when you're trying to recall something. Now, in addition to scratching your head being a well-established English idiom already, Who the hell is going to say Panapoo? I don't mean to come across as xenophobic, but there's just something to be said for phonetics. And that's not how words sound in English. And I think now in the era of standardized recorded dialects that we have just passed the window for phonemic change in borrowed words. To explain what I mean, the English word vamoose derived organically from the Spanish word vamos. English speakers in the Old West would hear Spanish speakers say vamos as they left places. And the former adopted the word as an unconjugated verb with different pronunciation that felt more natural to English mouths. Vamos became vamoose. And that's just Spanish, a fellow Indo-European language with a lot of shared history with English. If people were to start saying Panapoo for scratching their heads, then, well, for one, you'd probably have Hawaiian people on TikTok enraged that we are colonizing and ruining their language. So let's just leave Panapoo alone. Next, imagine that you, in your gluttony, are too impatient when eating something hot and are then forced to sort of cool it down in your mouth, the moving around and drawing in of air. Dr. Brzozowski tells us that the Buli speakers of Ghana call this Belinti. Again, how am I to use this word? So as not to repeat myself, let me make a counteroffer. If I'm burning my mouth and then have to do the embarrassing swishing about, someone sees my pained face and asks what's wrong, my response, mouth still full of scalding food, is hot. They immediately know the circumstance, whether or not they saw me eat, whether or not they knew that the food was way too hot. That one word in this context is able to convey, oh, I deign to say, an untranslatable amount of information. For this one, I quote, "We all try to listen to our body when it's saying it's full, but, sometimes there's something left on your plate, and you want to eat it because it's delicious, but you don't want to eat the whole thing because you're not actually hungry anymore. So you have a little spoonful here, and maybe a nibble there, and all of a sudden, it's gone. And by accident, you've become part of the clean plate club." Overeat. The word you're looking for is fucking overeat. But did you know that the Georgians call this phenomenon shimomachama? I don't fucking care what the Georgians call it. Anglophones call it overeating. And look, usually my take with this sort of thing is that it's fun, that a language has a unique or efficient or idiomatic way of putting something. But it's unfair to say that it's untranslatable or unable to be rendered in English. But this is honestly a worse example. In looking for what exactly made it unique, I found a post on the Reddit board Does Not Translate, where a user posted shimomachama and describes it as, "I didn't mean to, but I ate it anyway." And he gives the explanation, in Georgian, a lot of verbs can be transformed into a form that indicates the subject performed the action without having the intention to. And he just described the verbal prefix over. Overeat, obviously. What about oversleep? I overslept. I didn't mean to sleep that much, but I did anyway. I will concede that it could be argued that over refers to the quality of excess in an action rather than the lack of intent behind it. But I will raise you, if you plan on sleeping more than usual tomorrow, will you say that you are going to oversleep, or will you say that you are going to sleep in tomorrow? If you plan on eating a lot this evening, will you say you're going to overeat? Hold on, you may say you worry you will overeat, but if it's in your plans, you'll say something like, I'm going to pig out, I'm going to eat a lot. That over usually does connote accident or lack of intention. Ibi simsimhara, Korean for eating out of boredom, literally bored mouth. I think it's a good rule of thumb that these propositions shouldn't be longer than their English counterparts. That being said, I do like this one. I think we already talked about eating out of boredom in English, but the imagery of a bored mouth is nice, and I won't be saying ibi simsimara, but if you want to follow suit and make a bit of a calque out of this one, then saying you've got a bored mouth would be a very cute way to announce you're about to have a snack. I do like it. Brzozowski then claims that when you've eaten and you get tired, that the Italians call that abiocato. Thankfully, I'm a bit more familiar with Italian than with Hawaiian and Buli and Georgian, but with this, I'm pretty sure that the verb abiocarsi or abiocare just refers to sleepiness in general. I don't think that it's dependent on having eaten. So abioco, mi abioco, reflexive, is like I'm exhausted or falling asleep. Now, to my understanding, the verbal form is slightly archaic, and so it would be more common to say abiocato as an adjective, like exhausted or tired. So abioko without the reflexive pronoun or adjectival ending would be either a transitive verb or a noun, as she probably intends, meaning exhaustion or sleep. Again, I think it's commonplace to say something like sono abiocato after a meal, or like I'm wiped out, I'm tired from this. But I don't think the word is invariably tied to food or to eating. Again, I trust Brzezowski, so it's probably the case that in a particular region, abioko emphatically connotes a postprandial nap or something like that. But I would ask, does the meaning really contain this, or have existent associations with Italianness affected our exposure to the word, namely the importance of food as an Italian cultural export that may have led to us seeing this particular connotation. All right, this one I fully concede. Sobremesa is nice. There's not really a great phrase for this in English, and you can't really calc it either. It refers to the time you spend at the table after having eaten, just chatting or enjoying your company, and the post-meal lull. It's also an interesting word. So mesa is table, and sobre is like the prefix super or sur. It just means, over or above. The same word is used to describe a desktop computer. It can also mean, though I don't think it's as much anymore, like dessert, like at the end of a meal. And I'm not sure etymologically whether the sense of sitting around a table comes from that meaning of a dessert, it's like at the end of a meal, or if it refers to kind of the talking over the table. But either way, I like that word. She also puts a synonym to sobremesa, the Dutch verb natafelen, which doesn't sound as pretty as sobremesa, but it's fun because if you were to calc it, to translate it literally, you'd get after tabling, which is a cool sounding one. And the next one, I've never had patience for this one. It's the word hyuga. And don't get me wrong, I like the idea of it, but to say that it can't simply be evoked by words like comfy, cozy, and so on is just cunty. If anything, it's not that the word doesn't translate, but just that the Danish and Norse have a particular cultural aesthetic of coziness. Next is an Inuit word that I don't feel like a saying to pronounce. It means community spirit, but hey, you can just say community spirit in fewer syllables. All right, a proper untranslatable word, samar, an Arabic word which refers to sort of entertaining in the evening, staying up late and either talking or engaging in nightlife or kind of hanging out in the evening air and enjoying each other. I think it's definitely without a perfect translation because anything that comes close in English is like one aspect. So you have like stay up, which I think lacks the social aspect. And on the other hand, I think a word like nightlife is too emphatically social and also awkward to render as a verb construction. So to my understanding, which may be imperfect, it does mean really something more like stay up. And it is due to the culture and tradition that the convivial aspects are connoted. And I think that sort of situation is where the idea of an untranslatable word is really interesting, because it's not making a bullshit claim that a language has discovered and named some incredibly niche aspect of the universal human condition, but that their version of a common word has an indivisible connotation from the way that their people live. And this one really did fascinate me, so I tried to think hard of something comparable. I thought soiree, but I think that implies more formality. And then along that same note, in the form of another loan word, coincidentally, I think like a tertulia has that same formality or maybe even more artistic connotation. And I think this is a fun reminder of how, words don't exist in a vacuum. And these are all just describing human behavior. With these words coming, with those two earlier, coming from a more buttoned up way of living, describing what those kind of people would do in the evening, I think samar itself has older roots, probably reflecting a desert night spent around a fire, whether that's from nomadic origins or, on the more posh end of things, like a sort of a 1001 Arabian Nights situation. Though I do think there's one more interesting analog in English, and that's just the verb talk. Of course, that is in a very specific situation, which would be maybe you're describing what you and someone else did last night. And if you say you talked or just talked, I think that speaks for much more than it would initially appear to. Because you're saying in the night, you didn't sleep, you didn't have sex, you weren't watching movies or something, you weren't working on anything, you weren't troubled, or maybe you were, but you weren't like nursing a sickness or whatever. It describes recreation, conviviality, a casual evening together of talking, maybe putting on some music or eating, but mostly just enjoying someone's company. Not to say that that's a full translation for samar here, but a good and properly untranslatable word is thought-provoking and makes you think about what you do and how you describe those actions. It's not another synonym. And I think the problem with this list and so many others like it is that they have that sort of thesaurus quality. I wouldn't be opposed at all to a list that's more intentional, that instead of playing a game of obscurity, focused more on cultural relevance. I think these sort of things should be an opportunity to learn something new and to reflect on what you know. But they often tend to be learning insofar only as a form of collecting, unlocking new Fortnite skins type thing. And speaking of collecting and playing the obscurity game, the next word is from a recently extinct language, and it holds a Guinness World Record for succinctness. Mami hlapinatapai. Again, do we need that in English? Apparently, it refers to two parties looking at each other, wondering if they should initiate something, but neither will start. Clearly, I'm not familiar at all with the extinct Yaghan language of Tierra del Fuego, so I will have to extend my disbelief and not think that this is just an instance of mythologizing something from a dying language and imposing a frivolous amount of meaning onto it. Fine. Is it translatable? Maybe not, but does it need to be? You could just say that two people looked at each other wantonly, wistfully, wantingly. They met each other's gaze with restrained passion, with apprehensive desire. Are those too erotic? I read an article on Atlas Obscura that claims that the romantic undertones have been imposed on the word. A bit of colonization, I guess you could say. So try this. They gave each other a knowing look, a meaningful glance. And if you say that that's not a one-to-one translation, fuck you. Look at the word. It's agglutinated to hell. Just because a language has unfamiliar rules about throwing words together, that doesn't make the language more profound. She then talks about the Chinese word Maafon. It basically means inconvenient or bothersome in regard to something you must do. And I don't think it's untranslatable by any means, but I will say that in the Googling so that I didn't sound like a retard talking about this stuff, I came across a very nice blog post by Amora Cunningham, a historian who writes about China, who talked about her association of the word with a sort of heavy bureaucracy in China. And sorry to beat a dead horse, but that's what I love reading, these anecdotes about a word, and talking about its particular cultural connotations, rather than just grandiose claims that it's hard or difficult or impossible to render. She ends the video with a lightning round of a few words that, well, words that if talking about them would just be repeating myself, so I won't get into them. But there you go. I guess the takeaway is that we should appreciate the beauty of other languages and cultures, but should also take care not to denigrate or overlook that of our own in the process. There's a very decent chance that no one is listening at this point, so if you can hear this, I thank you. I just like talking about this stuff, and thank you for indulging me, and have a good day.